Thomas Dexter Jakes, universally known as T.D. Jakes, is more than just a pastor. He is an institution, a global spiritual brand, a cultural phenomenon, an author, film producer, orator, powerhouse speaker, entrepreneur, and a leader whose influence extends far beyond the walls of his mega-church. He has built something both grand and fragile, an empire of faith, hope, media, publishing, celebrity, and power. But now, the headlines surrounding him have taken a darker turn. In recent times, what was once polished, near untouchable, and inspiring appears to be facing deeper scrutiny. The controversies, murmurs, and sudden revealing moments have begun to ripple, not only through his congregation, but across the broader Christian world. What's unfolding now may well become the defining moment of his legacy. This isn't a simple scandal. It's not an isolated incident. What is emerging are layers upon layers of concern: financial transparency, leadership structure, theological consistency, public perception, all converging in a way that seems more serious than any previous challenge he has faced. When the name T.D. Jakes comes into people's mouths these days, it is not just with admiration or praise. There are questions. Is the pastor still the man of conviction who started from humble beginnings? Is the brand more powerful than the message? Is influence replacing intimacy? To understand why the current storm might be more consequential than others, one must go all the way back to how Jakes became who he is today. The rise. From humble origins to global platform. Born in 1957 in South Charleston, West Virginia, T.D. Jakes was raised by a single mother who balanced work, responsibility, and faith. His father, though owning a modest janitorial business, was seldom present. The mother carried most of the load. From early on, he learned about struggle, about the weight of societal expectations, of scarcity, of being a young black man in America, aspiring not only to spiritual leadership, but to relevance, to significance beyond economic constraints. His youth was also marked by a speech impediment. Many young people would have let it define them, let it limit their voice. For Jakes, it became both a burden and a catalyst, a hurdle that taught him empathy, patience, and the power of grit. His early sermons were modest affairs, small congregations, rented spaces, storefront halls. But his voice, raw and emotional, resonated with those who carried burdens of their own: pain, doubt, brokenness, loss. The kind of people who felt unseen in large churches that prioritized style over substance, or comfort over conviction. In the 1980s, Jakes founded a small church in Montgomery, West Virginia, with just around 10 members. But those 10 had access to his heart. They had access to his transparency, his stories of personal struggle, his testimonies of faith emerging from hardship. The people were drawn in by his willingness to address not only the spiritual questions, but the very real questions of identity, of race, of gender, of suffering. His first major breakthrough came in the 1990s with the phenomenon of woman. Thou Art Loosed, originally a book, then a conference, then a film. Suddenly, T.D. Jakes no longer existed only in pulpits. He appeared on screens, stages, in homes across the country. The message resonated especially with women, with the hurting, with those who felt they had been left behind, those seeking healing, restoration, identity. The film version turned his name into something recognizable, even outside church circles. And that's when his transition from pastor to spiritual brand began in earnest. He moved his ministry to Dallas, Texas, founding the Potter's House, and built it into one of the most prominent megachurches in America. The church campus itself mirrored his aspirations: expansive, well-equipped, multimedia ready. Thousands gathered weekly. His books topped charts. His conferences drew crowds in the tens of thousands. Appearances on talk shows, interviews, film tie-ins, and partnerships with cultural figures broadened his reach. And the duality of influence and controversy. With great visibility came great expectations, and also heightened scrutiny. Over the years, T.D. Jakes has been idolised, emulated, criticised, challenged, and defended. He built trust and emotional connection with many, but with that came questions about how his ministry used its resources, about whether his messages were more about empowerment and success than sacrifice, about whether the celebrity pastor model dilutes intimacy with the congregation, about whether fame had crept in. Some critics accused him of leaning too close to prosperity gospel rhetoric, even if he never fully adopted the label. Luxury homes, expensive cars, high production value conferences, high price tickets to retreats, all these became fodder for debate. Supporters argued that such things were tools, investments into ministry and outreach, and that the scale of his operation required professionalism, excellence, and visibility. Yet the tension between message and image was always there. On social issues too, his balancing acts drew both admiration and criticism. Regarding LGBTQ issues, gender roles, politics, race, he often walked a careful line, sometimes being vague enough to open himself to critique from multiple sides. When one is a person who wishes to bridge culture and faith, unity and truth, the line to walk is thin and often unstable. Some saw compromise, others saw wisdom. The emerging storm, what's new? All of those prior criticisms, most of which Jakes parried with grace or deflection, now seem to have coalesced. The recent headlines point to something more expansive than any one accusation. Instead, they suggest a systemic inquiry into the ministry's operations, character, theological consistency, and accountability. 1. Financial transparency and stewardship. A central concern being raised is money, how it is collected, how it is spent, how it is reported. Megachurches, by their nature, deal with vast sums: donations, book sales, ticketed conferences, merchandise, media deals. Yet, for many, transparency has lagged behind influence. Critics are asking, are the finances being used for ministerial, charitable, or communal mission purposes? Or is a portion of the empire being invested in lifestyle, luxury, image management? While the Potter's House has released public financial disclosures before, those familiar with non-profit best practices note that the level of detail often presented is insufficient by the standard of what many expect in terms of accountability. Some former insiders allege that high-ranking staff have been removed or resigned quietly. Rumours suggest friction over financial oversight. While none of these claims have been fully substantiated, the chatter has picked up volume and urgency. 2. Organisational leadership and internal culture leadership conflicts are purported to have come to the surface. Some ministries report that staff members have felt stretched thin, overwhelmed, or under-supported. Allegations of burnout, lack of clarity in chain of command, high turnover. The challenge for many large ministries is scaling their internal systems, organisational infrastructure, pastoral care, HR, communication, with the same excellence as their external image. People close to Jakes argue that some internal tensions are inevitable when a ministry becomes as big as his. When decisions affect tens of thousands, or when millions are watching, even small missteps gain outsized attention. Yet critics argue that unless such leadership structures are transparent, healthy, and humble, the risks grow, not only to reputation, but to the spiritual health of those served. 3. Public perception, image, and media pressure. In the age of social media, one sermon clip, one offhand remark, one luxury purchase can become a story trending across platforms. What once was a private matter can now become public within minutes. For T.D. Jakes, whose brand depends heavily not only on what he says but how he is seen, this magnifies every action, every statement. Recently, video clips have circulated widely, some interpreted as dismissive toward women in leadership, others seen as tone-deaf in the context of current social debates. Supporters argue these clips are taken out of context, that sound bites cannot fully capture nuance. But in the court of public opinion, nuance often gets lost, and once a narrative is established, it's hard to reverse. 4. The question of legacy and moment of reckoning. Perhaps what distinguishes the current controversy from past ones is the stakes. More than just damage control or repelling criticism, this feels like a potential turning point. If past mistakes or unresolved questions are allowed to accumulate without transparent responses, they risk evolving into narratives that outlast sermons, books, or conferences. The question becomes, how will T.D. Jakes respond? Will he adapt? Will he clarify? Will he accept scrutiny, invite accountability, and risk exposing vulnerability? Or will he double down, asserting authority and maintaining distance? For many of his followers, this moment may feel like betrayal, confusion, uncertainty. For critics, confirmation. But for all observers, it is a test of his integrity, his values, and how faith intersects with power and fame in 21st century Christianity. What this means for the broader church. This isn't just about one man, it's about a model of ministry that relies heavily on celebrity, large staffs, massive conferences, high production, and international influence. It's about how churches raise funds, how they report finances, how pastors live in the public eye, and how they are held accountable. It's about whether authenticity can coexist with scale, whether humility can survive visibility, whether truth can prevail in a sphere where image is so central. Young generations, millennials, Gen Z, are less likely to accept opaque structures or unquestioned authority. They demand transparency, authenticity, moral consistency. They scrutinize disparities. Is the pastor's lifestyle aligned with the sermons? Are donations being used for the needy or for glitzy productions? Does the leadership invest in marginalized voices, or is it insulated in its own power structure? Furthermore, the way religious leadership is consumed has changed. Streaming services, podcasts, YouTube, TikTok, all these mean that sermons and ministries must navigate not just theology, but media, public relations, branding, controversy. The pace of feedback has accelerated. There is little time to manage slow reputational damage. Once trust erodes, it's very hard to rebuild. But what comes next? Paths forward. So, what might T.D. Jakes do now? There are a few plausible courses, each with its own risks and potential rewards. Transparency and accountability. One pathway is full openness, detailed financial reports, substantive communication with congregants, openness about internal leadership structure, acknowledging past missteps. This can rebuild trust, though it risks exposing more than one might prefer. Clarification and defense. Jakes could choose to respond selectively, clarify statements, contextualize video clips, defend his decisions, perhaps offer apologies where needed, but maintain a strong posture of conviction. Reform from within. Maybe structural reforms, strengthening governance, adding oversight boards, improving staff care, flattening bureaucracy, and increasing participatory decision-making. Reinforcement of brand and message. He could double down on the existing brand, focus on sermons, large production events, high visibility, to drown out criticism with positive outcomes, charitable work, social justice initiatives, community impact. Retreat from public spotlight. Less likely given his past patterns, but a partial slowing down, more behind-the-scenes work, investing in local causes rather than big media events might be a way to reset narratives. Conclusion: power, influence, and the weight of expectation. T.D. Jakes stands today at a threshold. He has for many years embodied attention, faith and fame, service and celebrity, prophetic voice and public brand. These dualities defined his rise. They were part of what made him compelling, relatable, and powerful. But now, those same dualities may be the source of vulnerability. The higher the climb, the further one falls. Or so the old adage goes. If this moment is handled with authenticity, humility, transparency, it could renew respect, reaffirm purpose, and deepen his impact. But if mismanaged, if critiques are dismissed, or accountability minimal, it could erode trust and recast his legacy in terms more complex than sermons and sold-out auditoriums. The stories in headlines today are not just about alleged financial misdeeds, theological ambiguity, internal tension, or social perception. They are about what happens when a human calls himself steward over millions. Can one maintain integrity when success, fame, and expectation pull in conflicting directions? Can growth be healthy when scrutiny intensifies? For Pastor T.D. Jakes, this could very well be that defining chapter, one that future generations reference when they talk about the promises and pitfalls of megachurch leadership, the collision of faith and fame, and the cost of influence. In the intersection of power, influence, and faith, few sit as high as T.D. Jakes. And now, one of his greatest tests may not be in preaching to packed auditoriums, but in answering to the expectations of transparency, fidelity, and legacy. The world is watching, and this story is far from over.